Welcome, everyone. My name is Işın Önal. I'm the Director of Curatorial Research at the MA Curatorial Practice Program at the School of Visual Arts in New York City. Alongside Stephen Henry Madoff, the chair of our program, it's my pleasure to extend a warm invitation to this installment of our conversation series, The Algorithmic State. This series invites artists, curators, and cultural workers who explore crucial technological developments critically. Our aim is to foster critical discourse on the societal, philosophical, and environmental ramifications emerging from the rapid advancements in machine learning and artificial intelligence. Today's panel, The Algorithmic State, Invisible Human Labor, invites a compelling discussion with distinguished artists and thinkers Stephanie Dinkins, Vladan Yolar, and Josh Klein. Together, we will speak about the hidden layers of AI, spotlighting the often overlooked human and environmental inputs that sustain the digital age. This conversation aims to dissect the impact of automation technologies on the future of labor and the labor market, probing into the nuances of AI as a modern black box that masks the essential yet invisible human and environmental resources. Stephanie Dinkins, with her pioneering work on the potential interactions between artists and socially engaged robots, propels us towards envisioning technological ecosystems that prioritize care and equity. Her artistic inquiry challenges us to contemplate the ethical dimensions of our relationship with AI, fostering a future where technology harmonizes with human values. Vladan Yolar, renowned for his intricate mappings of the unseen infrastructures powering AI systems, exposes the complex narratives of labor and environmental impact cloaked within the technological progress. His critical analysis revealed the hidden workforce and resources that form the backbone of AI, urging us to consider the socio-political, environmental, and power dynamics tied to these systems. Josh Klein, through his artistic focus on labor and class, navigates the profound transformations brought about by climate change, automation, and the erosion of democratic values. His work invites us to reflect on the shifting landscapes of work and societal structures in the face of technological evolution and environmental challenges. As we delve into the contributions of these visionary artists, our discussion will shed light on the critical issues at the intersection of art, technology, and human labor. Their work not only uncovers the underlying forces shaping our algorithmic reality, but also encourages us to confront the ethical, aesthetic, and socio-political questions crucial to navigating our collective future. Each presentation will span approximately 15 minutes, followed by a collective discussion period. We encourage you to engage with us through the Q&A feature for the concluding segment. This session will be recorded, providing an opportunity to revisit and reflect on our dialogue at your convenience. Whether you are with us live or tuning in later, we are thrilled to embark on this intellectual voyage together, exploring the hidden dimensions of human intelligence and deep insights offered by our evolving technological counterparts. Thank you very much. And Vladan, the stage is yours.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation. And it's really nice to be in this crowd and to discuss such an important topic. So basically, who am I? Basically, I like to think about myself as some kind of like a critical cartographer. But basically, I didn't start this research and this investigation with that idea. Basically, we started from something really little, from one single internet packet, and tried to understand what is happening in this little life of one single internet packet. But that somehow this investigation went like deeper and deeper and deeper, and we started to discover and investigate one by one many different hidden layers of this kind of like invisible infrastructure. So it started with super small, like one single packet, and ended up in some kind of huge planetary scale systems. And I'm going to share the screen now with you. I'm warning you, it's really messy. And so it's going to maybe be some kind of like a roller coaster through many different big black maps. but the first one that I'm going to show you, it's called the Facebook Algorithmic Factory. And basically, this is the first map that basically brought me to this like a question of labor. And because basically for me, what I wanted to understand there, it's like how this factory look like, no? So we started back then, this is like some kind of 2014 or something. Back then, we were like hooked up on this idea of algorithmic transparency. So we did like 1 or almost 2 years of deep dive into trying to understand and trying to reverse engineer, trying to research different kinds of Facebook algorithms and so on and so on. And I end up, and this is basically the first big black map that I created, end up with this picture. And basically on the left side, we have all the inputs into this factory. We basically scraped all the interfaces. We tried to map all different like ways of interacting with Facebook. Then we dig into like thousands of different like patents that Facebook had about functioning of its own platform. So we tried somehow to create this drawing that's supposed to give us a picture about this invisible factory, you know? And then on the right side of this map, there is basically, we also scraped interfaces and tried to understand what is the product of this factory. And so my research usually goes like this. I'm first like trying to investigate, trying to find a way how to collect data, and then this is like some kind of combination of many different investigation techniques. Sometimes we are doing some kind of like cyber forensics, sometimes we are scraping interfaces, sometimes we are researching patents or whatever we can find, no? And then I'm trying to assemble some picture, no? And then basically for me, it was like super interesting because like, you know, I wanted to understand how the factory looked like, and this is the picture that I got, no? And then I was like, first back then I was like thinking, okay, maybe I can think about this factory in a sense of this kind of like immaterial labor, you know. So that's kind of early 2000 theories. Like all of us, we are basically working for Facebook, and every time when we click something, we are basically creating this kind of free labor for them and so on and so on. But for me, like just looking at this picture was like kind of and this is first time when I started to think in this relation about like resource, labor, and product. So it was clear that on the right side of this map, it's basically that all of us, we are some kind of product, or basically our profiles, our information about us. This is the product. But I was like kind of concerned, like in a sense, what are we like in this factory? Are we basically a resource that is being digged, or we are some kind of immaterial labor, or what is the position of the user in this system? And basically more and more, and I'm going to show you some other maps, more and more I was like digging into this. I was like more and more like fascinated and like intrigued about this idea about what is the resource, what is the labor. And here in this map, I was like even explaining in the text about this like that we are this kind of resource field. And then I was like imagining this kind of like all the time trying to think about this, like what it means to be a resource, no? And then after that investigation, I started another one. And this one basically completely blew my mind in many different directions. And it also took us like maybe 2-3 years to do it. This one, it's called the Anatomy of an AI System. And I did it together with Kate Crawford. So basically, all of those like 5-6 years of investigation before, I was basically just investigating this middle line of the process. So basically what's going on between us as a users, and then how we are diving deeper and deeper. I was diving deeper and deeper into this kind of layers of infrastructure. So basically from networks into data centers, and then into algorithmic layer, and then basically into infrastructures behind the basically this machine learning process and so on. But then, and okay, we can attach to any of those dots that we are seeing here in this map some form of invisible labor, no? So we can speak about, I don't know, people who produce those devices, people who are fixing those infrastructures, people who are laying cables, people who are working in data centers, people who are programming the algorithms, and so on, so on, so on. But where this map exploded in different directions, in different dimensions, is basically when we included time into story, no? So we were like thinking, okay, like all of those parts of this like infrastructure that is backbone of this extended anatomy of one single device, in this case, one single device, it's Amazon Echo device. If we think about this like backbone in like 40 or 50 years ago, like all of those like devices and objects that are assembling this backbone were basically different types of rocks, no? So then we started to investigate, and then story started basically from Earth and individual elements of periodic system, and then when you change perspective in that way, the story became completely different, no? So we are not speaking anymore about some kind of, high skill labor, doing some kind of programming or like even, I don't know, labeling data sets. We are getting back into this kind of old extractivism in a way, like something that we can trace back for hundreds and hundreds of years, something that is like core of this kind of like industrial revolution and basically colonialism and everything is basically exploitation of human labor and basically so the story became completely different. And then we started to investigate different parts of this like supply chain, and we tried again in this map to represent this story with these triangles that you are seeing here. So again, it's this kind of question about like resource, labor, product. So basically I choose this like visual element of triangle to tell a story in which the resource with the use of labor, it's becoming a product, and then this product, it's becoming again a resource, and then it's kind of some kind of like a process of transformation through those triangles. But then basically what was like for me really interesting and when I was doing this research and trying to visualize all of this, it basically I understood that somehow for me this process, because more you're digging down, more you're seeing that it's never ending story. So for example, like just a few weeks ago, or a few months ago, we did some kind of scraping of one supply chain website. So it's a website for supply chain professionals. And so we just did like a three layers of supply chain for NVIDIA, these kind of chips. And we got some kind of like a list of 2 million rows. That means like probably tens and tens of thousands companies. And that means again, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people being part of this supply chain, invisible supply chain of one single part of the hardware. So in a way, for me, the obvious visual representation of this story was some kind of fractal structure. And in a way, basically, when I started to draw the anatomy of an AI first time, I was thinking to do it in the form of fractal. So basically, this at the end, this image, this map, is some kind of like separated in 3 parts. On the left part, we are seeing a birth of one device. In the middle part, it's a life, and on the right side, it's death. And so the question is, for me, it was always like, if we are speaking about labor, first to understand the scale of this kind of planetary scale factories, because like the most of the device, of course, that we are using are kind of like produced by the planetary scale factories, you know. So basically you have like a mix of different planetary scale systems. You have a planetary scale factory of production, of hardware, of materials, of energy, of everything. You have planetary scale system of computation and planetary scale system of communication, communication that are somehow mixed together, no? And for me, it was always interesting because like the human labor, it's like, you know, like it's all over this like planetary scale systems, and for me it's like this kind of investigation into all of them, it's endless. So it's always for me question like when we are speaking about labor in context of like digital devices or platforms, you know, in which segment we are speaking, because like it can be like from planetary scale to like really simple. And then like from there, I will not go into details. We, together with Matteo Pasquinelli, we tried also to deconstruct this kind of production chain of one machine learning system. And then of course you understand when you start to go into this kind of like dissecting the process, that in each step you have some kind of human labor, and then basically there is no any kind of artificial intelligence, or anyway, like as they say, it's even not artificial or intelligence without human decision, because without human labor, and each of those like decisions have its own bias. So we started to understand that there is like, you know, all of this left part of this map, it's basically different forms of human interactions, human choices, and each of them are basically adding another layer of bias, one on top of another. And the latest research that we did, it's called calculating empires, and basically this crazy map, this is a half of the map. Basically, it's took us 4 years, and we tried basically to go back in time even more. So with Anatomy of an AI, we follow this kind of like 30, 40 years life of transformation, but here we went into 500 years of basically history of computation, a history of communication, computation, and classification and power at the end. And there is many, of course, labor, it's everywhere around this. But for me, like the part that I was like completely stuck on, and that I'm always coming back, is basically this kind of like Taylorism, and how in the root of this kind of scientific management is basically again this process of automation of labor, in which even in that moment it was not in the same way that is happening today, but in a way like this kind of appropriation of our work, in sense of like, once, for example, the core idea of this Taylorism was like you know, like if you dissect one complex process, so for example the I don't know, someone making a shoe, into like 100 different like moves of body, you are basically able to somehow transform this work into an algorithm, and into some kind of like and then basically by doing that you are able to replace all the people with non-skilled workers, who, because they don't need to do anything special, they just need to do like one little part of the business. And this is what we are seeing now, like a few hundred years after, basically in all of those processes of automation. It's basically like cutting the parts of the working process into pieces and trying to automatize all by self. And in a way, I think I will maybe stop here with this and leave this discussion for later. Thank you for surviving this like a really fast guide through all of those like big black
Thank,
maps.
thank you very much, Vladan. Of course, it's a very complex work and a lot of information. It's very hard to convey all of it within 15 minutes. I also have questions, but I'd like to make sure that every participant has enough time, so I will keep them for later. I just saw one question from an audience asking about if this work was available online. I know the anatomy of an AI exists online, so I shared that link, but I'm not sure about the two other works you mentioned, especially the very
Yes,
recent.
all of them are available except the last one because we still didn't manage to do it physically. Basically, we just finished the work like a few months ago, and the scale is so big that we are still finding a way how to do it properly online.
Mhm.
But now it's just available in for example in Berlin in exhibition or something like
At
this.
the
But
exhibition.
it's coming soon.
Thank you. Feel free to share the links at the Q&A section if you would like. Thank you very much. So we will come back to this. So Stephanie, the stage is yours.
Thank you. It's great to be here with you all. Hi, everyone. Stephanie Dinkins here. I'm going to, I think, look a little bit at some of my work in the context of labor. And interestingly enough, thinking about what Vladan just said, about the planetary scale of labor and what these systems are doing and what AI systems are doing. I'm thinking a lot about what happens when we're thinking on the individual community scale and how individuals and communities can make meaning in the face of such systems. Do we have any agency, and what agency can we possibly pull? Or how can we even try to kind of push the systems a bit to do better by us? So let me share my screen, and I'm so sorry, I'm a little sick, so if I say confusing things, excuse me. So I'm going to start with Not the Only One, which is a project of mine, I started in maybe 2018. And something interesting about this work is I feel that at this point, it's all super duper old, right? In terms of the technology it uses and how it functions, but what it's taught and how it's kind of brought me along in terms of what labor towards systems means and what labors within systems mean is still really relevant. So Not the Only One was done or started in 2018, especially this sculptural version. It's trying to be, and it is still just trying to be a voice interactive memoir of my family, right? So 3 generations of women doing oral histories together, and then taking that and making a chatbot. Before, it was super a simple thing to do, because I feel like this is such a easy thing to do at this point. Whereas when we started this, it was ridiculously hard. And I kept running into issues, and the issues that I would run into were issues of, you know, data being what I would say is violent, right? Like, so the data that was available to me to build upon felt violent towards the information that I was building into it, right? So I didn't want my family's data built on a basis that already had such biases towards Blackness that it wouldn't hold it well. It couldn't care for it. And so it put me on this journey of trying to figure out, well, okay, if I want to build a chatbot and I want to make it something that is supportive of what I understand Blackness to be and how it's lived, what am I going to do? And I asked many people, went to many places, they're like, oh, this point it was Cornell movie data set, right? Based mostly in American movies. I'm like, no, that's highly biased. We already know that, right? Okay, what else can we do? Reddit, are you out of your mind? Wikipedia, still super gate kept, right? Like super gate kept and small in certain ways without enough information about Blackness to be supportive. So it became this journey of like trying to figure out, and let's see if we can go forward here. And I'm going to skip this slide, figure out what to build on and how to do it. And it really also became a journey of trying to explain this thing to the public, because what I got was, we had 40,000 lines of information, nothing, right? Built on top of what we wound up on a good news data set as our floor for the bigger data set language model, right? The larger language model. Still not great, but better than most. And then I filled in with information that most, like our family, actually, the women that informed it actually impacted us. So like cultural touch points, some TV, some essays, some music, anything we could find that felt good to put it in. And what it made was a very wonky, very inconsistent, very strange chatbot that would sometimes answer correctly, sometimes ignore people, sometimes just not do the same thing, which was interesting because it made curators really mad most of the time, right? Because the expectation was that this thing would perform in the ways that were expected. And it didn't. And it's something that I come to, and it still doesn't, and I can fix it, right? But I've come to love that aspect of it. When it's in public, it's really interesting how much grace people show this thing. And the way that they have to kind of care for it to try to get it to communicate well. And the way that they fall into it, which is in great contrast to the way that, if you communicate to many chatbots, like I always say, if you've ever watched a 5-year-old communicate with Siri or Google Home, they yell at it, they order it, right? They do all the things that we put into these labor-based things that are just supposed to serve us, which are usually not great. Right? So the training that is going into the machine is coming back at us in ways that I think reflect some of the worst of us, right? And so the question of labor here becomes like, well, what is the labor we need to do to build not only in the machine, but in ourselves, a modicum of care, love and generosity versus expedience, and capital in a lot of ways. And so, this was I'll just explain the sign a little bit. This was a sign we came up for, not the only one, for the Smithsonian, just trying to explain to people a little bit how they should interact with it. And it's like AI, like our elders. And the question starts to become, well, how do we nurture the AI to be what we need it to be? And what is it doing to nurture us? And how do we go slowly with it? And how do we not see it as just another cog in the service machine, which I think, we run the risk of training ourselves into a world that is quite bent towards our needs, but also towards our coarseness and gracelessness, if that makes any sense. And so, like, well, what would it mean to treat AI like elders, AI like things that are in our environment that we need to care for? And so out of that project came this project, which I also think is just ridiculous and defunct at this moment, called Binary Calculations Are Inadequate to Assess Us, right? So I was thinking about the way that algorithms are made and what the choices are in terms of the binary, and why we stick with this idea of binaries and how much information a binary cannot hold, yes or no, black or white. I don't know. My brain is not functioning. But what can we do to like start to inform these systems somewhat better so that, they're starting to see the gray, and see the gray well, not only see the gray, but see the gray well. And for me, this became very much a question of what I call the wedding dress problem, right? So if you imagine in your mind right now, you're Googling the idea of wedding dress, what's the first thing that you think will come up, right? The Western white wedding dress. However, around the globe, there are many versions of what a wedding dress looks like. And the question for me became, well, how do we get these machines to not only show us this one version of what something is, but to show us the spectrum of what is possible and what is actually what is. And if you think about global population, probably what is more popular in the long run, not what the myth is, right? But what the actuality of how wedding dresses function throughout the world. And this project, you know, through making it, it was really an app, and I've let it go in a lot of ways that would allow people to answer questions about themselves. And this is about the labor of, and this is interesting, right? Because I'm thinking about bringing labor back to people, back to communities, to kind of fill in some of the gaps so that we can be, seen. Why am I automatically? I'm going to go back for a second. So that we can be seen well by the machines. And then the question becomes, well, do we want to be seen that well? And which information do we hold and which withhold, and which information do we put out? But, you know, and the other thing was this idea of coming to consensus around ideas, like what does care even mean? I'm saying, like, how do we create systems of care and generosity? Well, what does that mean? And is there a way that we could use the system itself to start to define some of those things globally, right? So when I'm thinking about this, in this project in particular was made small so that, you know, a flip phone could possibly use it, because I think it's really important that a farmer out in rural India could do this as well as someone in New York City. Yeah, but well, how do we start to get systems? And I've come to think of this as an inadequate project at the moment, because, you know, things have changed. This started also, what, 2019. The way that we're looking at information and data, right, has changed so much since then. The way that we can train data with smaller bits of data pretty well has changed so much, so that, you know, and now I have to think of labor on multiple layers, because you put all this energy into these things, layer of labor. You ask others to put all this information, all this energy into things, labor. Thinking about how we keep that idea of like what we do as individuals or communities and not lose it, because it feels like it's, you know, you can kind of entice people to do the work, but if the work is obsolete in a few years, what do you do? And how do you return to it? And how do you keep it relevant? I think as ideas, again, this information is relevant, but as a functioning object or artifact, it becomes kind of oddly irrelevant. Let's go on. So, and this all came out of this, right? So, this idea of looking for myself in the system, right? So this is just a quick image made on Runway ML a long time ago. So funny because I'm about to say 2016, a long time ago. But in AI years, I feel like that's ancient times, right? But this was the image of a Black woman crying. Again, kind of like a wedding dress problem. Why can't I get what I'm looking for out of these images? What has to be done, and who has to do this labor, or at least who has to put in the work to say, hey, this is work that needs to be done, right? And so, you know, after producing that image, I kept coming back, and I do keep coming back to this experiment often, to just see what systems can reproduce of the community. And I'm going to say the community that I care about. And for me, that's a bit of individual labor that I'm willing to do. And then trying to figure out, how do we collectively start to inform these systems? So is this an African-American woman smiling? The image on the end is the output, and then the images that you're seeing are the images that Google Colab pulled to build that image, right? And if you see, it's like very interesting to start to look at where and why and how, and what data is being used. And it seems to be like all high schooly pictures, right? And then for me, the idea becomes, what strategies do we start to have to get different outcomes? This is a dark-skinned African-American woman smiling, right? circa what 2018, I think this one is. And this is the basic standard, a woman smiling. Again, back to this weird kind of school picture, but you know, this idea of what is our data doing in the world? How is it working? And what do we need to do to change the representations within? And I don't want to get it stuck in just representations. So I started thinking, oh, well, though I just said I don't want to bring it to just representation. I'm going to bring it harder into representation in the world. And you will see that I believe a lot in individual work that then builds into community work, that then builds into more, let's say, organizational work, right? And that's been one of the things that has, I think, worked in my practice, like doing something because I'm curious about it, pushing it towards a community or asking a community for their input and how they work about it, and then going into some kind of organization and showing them this thing that works a little bit different from what they've been doing and ask them why they can't do something similar or why they're not working in similar ways. So Secret Garden is important to me as a work of labor, because actually it's asking of the labor of others. It's saying, can you listen to these women, right, and their stories? And you'll note that I'm going back to how do we understand each other's individual stories so that we can then build systems that better work for whichever community you're working in. And this was, what was this thing? This is a installation. It's also an online, XR project that you can go see at stephaniedinkins.secretgarden.com. I'll put that in the chat in a little bit. That is based on 6 sets of stories that are connected loosely, but trying to get to the point that each person is based on one another's stories, and we can't disconnect ourselves from that thing. And this is a point in which I started thinking about narrative in AI and how information, how narrative, and how the myths we tell ourselves and each other are super important to the ways in which we construct the systems that we do. And that if we can't listen to each other on a level that is, let's say, an installation in a space or a one-on-one, you know, I don't know, say ladies on a tennis court, how can we make systems that support each other fully, right? The other place that I will say that we're putting lots of labor, or that lots of labor is going, is to be open and to make space for as many folks as possible. For instance, there's a little thing on the bottom says growing a protopian collective. We put such effort into making this accessible in terms of hearing, to make like these subtitles, which is a whole other layer of labor on a system. And I find that we often get systems that they have the base layer. Okay, fine. It does the basic work that most people can access. But then we leave it, leaving, I don't know how many hundreds of thousands, millions of people out of the loop. And as a person who is living in a body that is failing, I've come to understand the labor that is needed to start to think about all those other communities. And I'm trying to figure out ways that we start to think about them now in our whole bodies before we even get to the point where we're falling, because we tend to think about these things when we need them as individuals, right? So for instance, how does an architect better outfit a building, right? For mobility, for hearing? How does a museum make things touch sensitive, feel sensitive, blind sensitive? And then I'm coming to the end of my thing. This is a continuation. This is a newer experiment. So this is me trying to use systems. And you'll notice that I'm often using the systems that I'm not even going to say I'm criticizing them, right? I think I use them to try to get something different out of them, which often inevitably brings out some problems in them. And then put them back in front of the kind of powers that be that might be able to shape them. right? And I think that's an important trek for any individual, any community to think about, right? Because, I'm trained in none of the stuff that I've been doing. And it's interesting to feel a bit of like impact in the way that we're thinking about this. So what this is a project that is trying to come into being called the stories we tell our machines. So this is my newest mission, which is a culmination of all these things. And what it's trying to do is take a photo of a person and read that person. And then the machine describes the person gets to describe themselves. We see the difference in the two descriptions. So like where are the discrepancies between the two? And then the machine generates an image based on the melded descriptions from the machine and the person with a little artist influence in it. I did not take these pictures. I was embroiled in a thing while we were doing this, right? So, and I'm always asking these kinds of questions, like what cultural context would help AI become a better collaborator, right? This is based on the idea that I'm like, well, people keep telling me how they fear this stuff. I'm like, well, AI it's here to stay. It's not going anywhere. What do we do about it? Do we have any power to do something about it? Can we push it in directions that are helpful for us? And I don't think this is anywhere near done, although I also think that the idea of putting this kind of work in public, usually with Black and brown folks at the helm, as creators is really important, right? Just making the idea of the labor of the piece and it coming into being visible to me is important. This image is what the heck is this? This is AI assembly this summer. Last summer we had a residency out at Montalvo Art Center. So every evening at around 5 o'clock, we would gather for a conversation about AI and what we were thinking about AI. And it is an intergenerational convening of folks, right from the kids of some people who are really involved in this stuff to some high-level theorists on the ideas. And I think this kind of, I'm going to go back to this. This is an early piece that will not get out of my presentation, but has a lot, it's a Nikisi that has a lot to do with what's going on. But this is what we were doing. We're thinking about wisdom versus knowledge versus intelligence. And you have to think about what it means for people to come together and put all this, I'm going to say again, labor into trying to think through systems and then taking this information on to try to either write or make around it so that it becomes visible to a greater public. And oh dear God, that image wants to be in there. What we came to was this thing called Wisdom Bot. And a Wisdom Bot is really interesting. As I said earlier, it's so much easier to make a bot these days. It is a bot we made in 2 weeks based on our ideas of wisdom. And what it was supposed to be is our intrinsic things that we've learned through family learning. It kind of looked like this. Let's see if this is going to play for us at all.
While testing your wakeboard detection, it might be beneficial to remember that understanding takes many forms. The absence of visibility on the front end doesn't mean there's a deficit of knowledge to be gained. Perhaps this is akin to writing a check without the funds to cover it. Yet on the other hand, one small point of data can fill a whole basket of understanding. It's a delicate balance, isn't it?
That's funny. So the idea of this thing is it's always supposed to ask a question at the end of ask the viewer a question. In public, it was quite interesting in that the public was asking this thing very serious questions, like, will my wife survive her cancer? Which also brings up the idea for me of the labor of care in terms of how you put things into the world and how they function. We were going to throw that thing up on a web as a nice kind of weird toy, but I can't now, right? We have to think through, and this will be another group think, right? Think through how we do this in a way that people understand what it is, what its capabilities are, how it functions, and what its limitations are, so that it is both something that can be elucidating in some ways, but people understand its limits. And I think that if we thought about our systems in this way, from top to bottom, right, from stupid things like this, but from things that big corporations are making, we do better off, right? That put it out into the world and then see what it does and break it isn't good enough, right? I really think we have to do and work a little bit harder on the idea that, you know, we make lots of systems that do surveillance well, that do punitive actions well. Why can't we do the opposite and consider care, love, generosity, so that they're supportive of the people that are within their globe? I'm gonna finish there. This is just a thing for my lab at Stony Brook University, that we are running and doing hands-on inquiry around this stuff and having some fun. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Stephanie, for this great presentation. Data being violent towards the information is something definitely I'd like to come back to, but let's now hear Josh as well. We have very limited time left, and then I hope we can also have some discussions based on these wonderful talks. Josh, the stage is yours. Thank you so much, Josh. Actually, I'm very grateful for all the labor you put into these presentations. Thank you so much. And yes, we are over time, but it would be very pity to just leave it here without any discussion. So I'm grateful that almost every area that I even briefly got touched upon that I wanted to deal with in this talk. On the one hand, your very complex mapping of this invisible labor, Vladan, give us a picture of what goes behind these technologies. And on the other hand, the notion of care, equity, generosity, and also the violence towards information, as you said, Stephanie, is out there. But what is also interesting is that when we think about the labor and AI, we often, on the one hand, we think about what is behind all these forces, the invisible labor, but on the other hand, the fear of losing our jobs and what happens next. And I think this is very deeply conveyed in the work of Josh. That's why I'm very thankful for this presentation. And I didn't want to interrupt you, although we were over time, because it was important to hear these. Because the way we look at our understanding of labor will have to change in this era, one way or the another. And at this point, instead of just posing questions, I would like to invite you perhaps for a discussion for visions for future, but perhaps also speculation of what happens next, how we can rethink our future in this landscape. In your work, Josh, the project for the New American Century, you also talk about the sort of approaching, considering the second American century and what happens and what kind of future is that. So you're actually asking a lot of questions about what future could be like. So I'd like to invite you to think about contemplating about future. In a way, I'd like to, of course, we see all the risks and dangers, etc. But I somehow, maybe from a naive point of view, would like to see some sort of a hopeful vision for the future, thinking about how we can imagine mitigating the adverse effects of, we, on the one hand, we talked about also with the mapping of Vladan, the climate change, etc. And again, the automation. And on the other hand, as Josh presented, the declining democratic values. And on the other hand, as Stephanie mentioned, all the lack of the coarseness that is actually at the door. So how could we perhaps together try to imagine certain not maybe solutions, but certain possibilities for the future. Again, rethinking about what labor could be like. As Josh mentioned, most of the labor that is being lost right now is often, if we don't think about the writers, it's often the jobs that actually we don't want to do, right? Most of these jobs people do because they have to do. So most of our time is given to certain jobs and certain labor that because we need to live within this capitalist system. So how could we imagine this otherwise? What happens if we are losing certain types of jobs? I will stop here because I just would like to contemplate together to think about what is next, how we can imagine hope, some sort of an hopeful future in this landscape. Who would like to start? Vlad, and I saw you smiling, so maybe you jump in.
I was smiling on this idea of that we all need to live in capitalist system. Yeah, because I spent like a really big part of my life not living in capitalist system, but in some kind of weird version of socialism. And then I was like reflecting when Josh was like presenting this kind of violence and like trying to understand this kind of idea that basically until I was almost 18, I lived in a country, it was Yugoslavia back then, and that almost had some kind of like, everyone had the same salary, everyone had a free flats and everything. So in a way, like, and I'm always curious how we are not able to rethink the future differently outside of this kind of capitalist system. But like, let's not go into that. For me, like it's more like what is super interesting for me, it's how we are going to redefine and understand labor in the future, because like doing this kind of research on like thinking about like resources in a sense like that our bodies are resources that are being like excavated, that are being captured and closed and then transformed into some kind of resource for exploitation. Then I was thinking like how deeper and deeper and deeper this like excavation is going. So in a way, like it's not anymore just about like location data. It's not anymore just about like, I don't know, it goes into, I don't know, breathing, it goes into heartbeats, it goes into your dreams that are being, extracted in a way and transformed into data. And then, so in that sense, thinking about the resource and labor relation, then you need to start to think that your bare existence it's basically like labor in a sense. Like you just need to exist when you exist in this kind of totalitarian super surveillance all the time. I mean, surveillance capitalism. You just need to exist in order to be extracted and exploited and whatever. So that means that we need to rethink like this labor of like, if we need to renegotiate, we need to think about our bare existence is labor, our breathing it's labor, our dreaming it's labor, because this is what is being exploited, no? And this really relates really well with this idea of universal income, and in a sense, if we want to go into that direction, this is also like super interesting. And also just to relate with some of the topics that Stephanie was like, I was thinking like when you were speaking about this kind of binarity 0-1 situation, for me, like I'm more and more starting to be interested in this kind of, basically I don't think it's anymore like this binary spaces. It's more like what is disturbing me, it's more like this kind of statistical spaces, and seeing some kind of like a deep some form of statistical totalitarianism. In a way, it's not so what is winning in this like huge data sets is basically this kind of statistical projection of the things that we have inside. And if you think about like if we think, what is winning there, what is becoming the answer is basically some form of like a majority always. It's always like terror of majority. It's this statistical totalitarianism. But the main problem, it's not related only to the present situation. So what kind of data set we have? It's this kind of historical, it's a reflection of all the different historical biases and historical positions, in a sense, like who had a chance like 300 years ago to make a book or to publish a book, to archive the book. So we are speaking about some kind of deep historical, statistical totalitarianism that is going to be built now, especially in these foundational models. If we are speaking about the creating of some kind of like AI models that are community-based, little models, nice. Okay, we can create and fine-tune our own machines that can do something nice that is based on our reflection, our data. But we are, in my point of view, we are going to be like, the society is going to be run on those like big foundational totalitarian models, not on the little ones, you know. And this is what is scaring me. So more this kind of idea of the rule of statistics, the rule of like, rather than like just black and white and 0 and 1. So that was my thoughts that I had like during your presentations.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think a lot about the quantitative versus qualitative. Like if you listen to anything now, people are like, but the data says, right? And every time we go to whatever the data says, and that's supposed to be the correct answer. Right. And I think that's untenable, right? We have to start thinking about what the qualitative is. And in a way, I agree with you, Vladan, right? Like, so this kind of statistical totalitarianism is a great possibility, right? But I can't help thinking, well, sure it is. If we try nothing, then we know what we get. We absolutely know what we get. But then what does it mean for us to start to try some attacks, right? Or some interventions. And the crazy dream of mine is that so many people are trying different kinds of interventions that they impact the whole in a way that it gets a modicum. And I really do mean a modicum better. But so it's like, you know, do we go with what the wave is coming at us and we can see it and we know, or do we do whatever it is to try to change it, even if it's a futile attempt? I feel like I have to try to change and convince other people to try to change. And I found it really interesting when Josh mentioned becoming, like those of us who are lucky enough to become our jobs, right? And I just went, oh my God, I never want to become my frickin' job. I want to become a human that is like has the ability to act as freely as possible in this society I live in, right? Or to be fully seen. And it's like, how do we project that across a landscape of people, right? And for me, the question always comes back to us, our histories, how we handle them, and what we're willing to do to change the way that we write, have written, and put them into AI systems, right? Like, are we willing to do the deep work, which I think right now is still deep human historical work and futuring work in terms of the way that now, what are we putting into these systems? Like, what are we willing to do? And I think the work that we have to do is hard, right? In terms of interrogating who, what, and how we are. It is deep. And it's going to take like such energy to actually do this work. And so from my mind, these like little models of like doing the work start to become a weird kind of like prick, you know, can we do the work? Because I'm sorry. For me, it's like, otherwise we know exactly what we're gonna get. I think it was yesterday I was listening to WNYC or something, and they were talking about the bottle collectors, right? And raising the bottle collecting to 10. And then they were positioning this as a job, right? And I think we have to be so careful about the way that we position these things, because yes, many people are like, I admire people who do that kind of effort to sustain themselves, but it's not a job, and we should never consider it a job that is viable for people to do. And I think that what you're saying, Josh, is really relevant to that, right? Like, yeah, how do we go where there are resources and bring them back into society versus going, oh yeah, this is the job and these people should unionize and do all this crap around this penny ante ridiculousness.
Exactly. Just thinking about what happens to the people who would do those jobs otherwise. I think this is the crucial point, and also thinking about the notion of care again. How what does it do in our communities, etc. So I guess there is a potential of that, and it could liberate us from the work that is otherwise completely unwanted, but only necessary to be able to bring bread to home. But on the other hand, how this could be done in an ethical way will need a lot of contribution by us to what gets into that data. And also, I think another important point is the AI literacy, how people use it, how people and who gets the advantage, so that as Vladan mentioned several times, that we don't simply become the product of it, but actually contributors to it. Thank you very much once again for your time, for the labor. I also, Stephanie, while you were sick, you joined us. Thank you so much for showing up today. And I'm very thankful for this mind-opening discussion, and I would like to continue more. We have to do these discussions because this is the life and the future. Thank you very much once again. And thank you to all our attendees who were with us today.